This is what we want to cover today, and just to re-emphasize what we really want to do with all of you partners who are working with us on the co-design is to move forward with mapping and publish linked data to the web and to the registry. That is the ultimate goal, and we're kind of at a crossover point where we really need to help you move forward with that. So we want to talk about today our approaches to meeting that goal. One of those approaches is working with vendors who have commonly used applications that are used by registry participants. We want to make sure that your technical and content teams are working together so we can help you map and implement this linked data on the web and in the registry. Regardless of whether or not it's the structured data, meaning it's data-driven, database-driven, using one of the API options. And Nate is going to demo one of those options today and talk about it a little bit more. The mapping API and unstructured data. So that would be HTML websites that don't the content is not delivered up via databases through structured data. And we're going to talk about using the CTDL editor that already exists when it's appropriate. And then next time we're going to get into the open source tools because we haven't really covered those yet. But we're going to cover the approaches up to the CTDL editor. And then for our next steps, we want to know how can we best work with each one of you partners on moving forward with the linked data. What can we do to help expedite? Should we come to your location and sit down with your team, for example, would be an option so we can really get together and get the goal met. So I want to talk about the vendor strategy, and a lot of systems out there have multiple sources for their data. They may be homegrown systems combined with HTML websites and other kind of back-end databases or products that are provided by vendors. So we realize that in many situations, especially colleges, universities that are large and have very large numbers of credentials, and many programs have multiple vendor systems, as well as customized, kind of homemade or custom developed systems as well. But when you are working with a vendor, what we want to do is work with the partners to identify the most dominant or predominant vendor systems, beginning with post-secondary and certificates and certifications that you're using currently, and look at those in two segments: web content management systems for all credentialing organizations, and then those related or more specialized to higher education systems. So we do know that often the vendor products are predominant in specific areas. And so we see, for example, in secondary education, a predominance of certain vendors versus in post-secondary certain vendors. And then certification bodies may use a whole other set of vendors or ways of getting their data out on their websites. So we'd like to ask for your recommendations on approaching these vendors, and ask the vendors to update their products to more easily map and push out the ultimate goal of the linked data on the web and in the registry. And I'd like to ask Bob, I've got a couple more slides to kind of go a little more into this, and we want to pause in this little section here to hear from you on what you think about the vendor segments and your suggestions and how we might even work with your vendors. But let me turn it over to Bob Sheets for a moment to kind of talk about these vendor segments and how they were identified as a starting point.
Yeah, what we did is we worked with the higher education advisory, some of the members there, to identify, to basically who came up originally with the vendor strategy. And when we then looked at many of our higher education partners as best we could determine, we came up and said that there's two predominant segments of the vendor marketplace in higher education, which are most likely to manage information related to CTDL. And as Jeannie points out, the first segment is the general web content management systems that are used by higher education, but also other credentialing partners like certification bodies. And we looked for at least a few that said they provided a service in publishing open link data. And these are two examples, but we urge you all to tell us some other examples of vendors that you all use for web content management. Then the second one was the segment that historically evolved out of course catalogs, and now they call it by different names, academic content management systems or others. And these are just two examples, but we know that there are other products in the marketplace. And so we're thinking, would love to get your input, that if we focused on these two vendor segments and then focus outreach with you all and other members of the higher education advisor group to reach out to vendors to participate in this process, we thought we could get the furthest along by focusing on these two with the leading vendors, but would welcome any sort of input or comments that you all would have about the strategy.
Yeah, I've got one more slide on this on some proposed actions, but before we move on to those proposed actions, participants, let us know what do you think about this? Early on with these webinars, some of you knew some of your vendors, and so we did identify those. We did not get all of them. We would, if you could tell us, it would be really helpful. But what are your thoughts? Jeff, I see that you're on. Chris, Joanne, Laura, Lee, Leslie, May, tell us your thoughts about the vendor approach.
Hey, Janine, this is Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi, Jeff.
Oh, good. I was on a different setup here, so I just wanted to confirm. Well, I like it. The more that could be done to help vendors support CTDL, the simpler it will be to participate in the registry on scale. So this is a very important step, and I'm glad to see it moving forward. Anything Capella could do to help, we'd be interested. I'll just share the tools we use in this space, but in drafting and thinking about how to engage the vendors, I'd consider how to help them promote their support of CTDL. So it's very clear that the product has some capabilities related to the registry in particular. That'll help them see what the value is of adding this to their roadmap.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And thanks for sharing the information in the chat. Thank you, Lee. Any other feedback? May and Chris, I know since both of you are involved with vendors that apply, standards, do you have any thoughts that you could share with the group? Not getting your audio.
Hey, Jeannie, this is Bob again. Can we thank you, Jeff, for providing that information. I would encourage other partners to also provide similar information on who you all use in each of those two segments. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, thanks. So we can send a follow-up email as well. Scarlett can send that so we can get make sure we have a clear listing of these vendors. Thanks, Chris. Okay, well, I'll move on to some proposed actions, and again, we encourage anyone on this webinar that has some feedback in the chat or go ahead and speak. Everyone has audio. I think we have a little bit of an audio lag, but do feel free to share your thoughts and ideas. So with our proposed actions, one of the actions that we would like to move forward with is with the higher education advisory group. So as you all may be familiar, I hope you are, the Credential Engine has multiple advisory groups. One of them is a higher education advisory group. And what we would like to do is kind of put this out to the chair of that group to also get some feedback from the higher education advisory group members. Now, we can also go, of course, to the other advisory groups, but just to begin there. And then using their feedback, kind of query the other advisory groups. Of course, this is something that we've already brought up with the Technical Advisory Committee as well. And then we can identify some vendors. What we'd like to do is hold some kind of, like orientation type webinars to introduce them to the work, and as Jeff was pointing out, the benefits to their product, engaging and promoting the goals of linked data on the web and on the registry, because it'll be beneficial to their products to include ways of easily pushing that data out. And we want to work with a couple of vendors, a small group of vendors, to actually implement something. We'd like to do that this year, and then use that experience as a sort of template, with other vendors. And then later this year, conduct some webinars and maybe some other formats, maybe some in-person events at a couple locations around the U.S. to kind of showcase the pilot partners. So to showcase the benefits of both the registry participants implementing that linked data on the web with maybe your custom systems or the options that we're going to go over today apart from the vendor option, and how vendors demonstrate how vendors, once they've made some updates to their products, how it's demonstrate those updates. Bob, anything to add to those proposed actions? No, I'm not getting your audio, Bob. I'm going to go ahead and move on, but let me know if you have anything to add to the.
No, Jean. We've already started to engage Louis Soares, the chair of the higher ed, but we'd love to get the input of many of the partners on the webinar today on additional ways to approach this. So we welcome your input.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Bob. Okay, so vendor strategy is going to be an important component of the approach, this kind of holistic approach to improving access to credentialing information on the web and in the registry. So go ahead, as you're thinking about that, feel free to follow up with us, feel free to put things in the chat. Again, at any point in the webinar, go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Before we move on to the other approaches, and today, as I had already said, we're going to focus on a structured data approach, and Nate is going to demo a mapping API that we're developing to make it as easy as possible to map one or more systems and push that data out. And we'll also talk about, for unstructured data, the options for unstructured data, and one of them is using the CTDL editor only when appropriate. And then next time we'll get into some other ways of dealing with that unstructured data. But I want to forward that with talking about competency frameworks. Part of the data that we've been looking for and including with the registry sandbox and showing on the Work It app are competencies. And I want to point this out because as we're kind of digging deeper into how that works, we're gonna start talking about that more. So this slide here, the credential engine services example, we like to make sure that when we're thinking about the registry, we're not just thinking about only a kind of like a repository. That's not all that we're talking about here. It's really a set of services. And so we have our credential transparency description language. We have a registry that offers APIs for pushing data in or pulling data in. And there's also a component of a competency registry that sits alongside the credential registry as well. And it has a public interface and it has APIs. And then authentication management. So basically anything that might need to log in. Some of this is just public information. You don't have to log in. But when you do, we'll have a single sign-on to the multiple APIs, all the different options for using these technologies. And of course, we have that Work It app prototype and the other developer tools. And along with the Work It app prototype, we have the CTDL editor. So I just wanted to reinforce that message and mention to all of you that we're working with ADL, Advanced Distributed Learning. They do, they're part of the U.S. Department of Defense, and they do education research projects primarily involving new technologies. And so we're working in partnership with them on some open source technologies that have been developed through the most recent ADL research project. And that is CAS, so it's a competency registry. And what we're doing is for all of our registry participant partners whose competencies that we have been collecting and including in the registry and the Work It app, initially we had to kind of fake out that data because we didn't have a place to put it. Now we have a place to put it. So what we're doing is putting the competency frameworks kind of side by side with the credential registry. And this crazy little diagram here, I'm going to ask Nate to explain it. But what this does is show how when you're describing a credential in the credential registry, how it uses that competency registry. Nate, can you talk about this a little bit and explain what we're seeing here?
Yeah. Okay. So this is vaguely technical thing, but trying not to get scared off by all the complicated-looking text. So what we've got here on the left is a credential, and within that credential, you see it's got a property called requires. And then inside the requires property, you've got these 4 boxes. Each one of these 4 boxes represents a credential alignment object, which is a thing in CTDL that we use to describe and point to objects that are external to whatever it is we're talking about. So we're talking about the credential, and external to that credential are these competencies, but we want to reference those competencies from the credential. So we have some different cases here. So these 4 alignment objects look a little different because each one contains sort of a different amount of data. In the first case, which is kind of the minimal amount of data you need for an alignment object, you can see there's 2 URLs in there, and they're kind of truncated, but the idea is that the one in red points over to the competency framework, and you can see the property that's associated with that is just framework, which tells us, you know, the framework for this alignment is the entire framework over here on the right. Then right beneath that is the green arrow. The green arrow points to a particular node within that competency framework, which in this case is just a competency. So the idea is that the credential via that particular alignment object is saying that I require the competency at this URL that lives inside the framework at this URL. So you see that's kind of the basic form of the alignment object. Now there's some more things you can do with that. So the second one here is the same idea. So it points to the framework. It points to a particular competency with the blue arrow. but it also includes the text from that competency. So you've got the name, the description, and the notation code. This is meant just for flexibility, so that if you want to provide an alignment object within your credential data that includes not only a reference to the competency, but essentially a copy of the competency, at least the important parts of it, within that alignment object, just to make it easier for whoever or whatever system is consuming the data about the credential to consume that competency, so it doesn't have to go out and actually retrieve it if it doesn't need to, if you include that data with it. That's just kind of an optional thing that the alignment object allows you to do. So the third one down here, we can see there's only one arrow coming out of this, and it's to the framework. It's this purple arrow. Now this one goes down to a PDF. So the reason we only have a framework arrow here for the PDF is because a PDF is just an object that lives at the end of a URL. There's no way to reference individual things within a PDF from like an external URL. So the best we can do with that is just point to the whole PDF as the framework, and then what we can do is, using the options I discussed a second ago, we can include the text of the competency along with the name and the notation code, so that whoever is consuming this data can say, okay, well, I don't have a reference directly to the competency, but I can at least get as far as the framework, and then once I'm there, I can find whichever one of these matches this notation code, title, and text, and that still allows, you know, a pretty good degree of referencing wherever that competency actually lives. And so the fourth example here is a case where what we've run into early on in WorkIt before we were, you know, setting up the CAS system, where essentially we were embedding all of the data we had about the competency within the credential data itself. So that in this case, there's no reference to anything. It's just using the title, text, and the notation code for that competency and embedding that in the credential. So this, again, the alignment object allows this whole sort of array of options for how much data, where it lives, what you want to include, just based on whatever situation you know, you're in. So the purpose of this is just kind of show off that all the options you have with the alignment object. So that's how we use that within CTDL.
Gene, may I jump in for a moment?
Of course,
I would
please
also
do.
make this observation. If you start with the last of those entries, the one referencing the PDF, from the bottom up is also a scale of desirability. If we look at that last node in the competency framework where all of it is embedded, it's not referencing anything on the outside, that is the least desirable condition. If a competency framework is only in a PDF with the purple line there, then that's pretty good, that's okay, but it beats a stick in the eye, but it's not where we ultimately want to get. The most desirable circumstances are the ones at the top that are able to specifically reference a competency individually that exists out there in something else. So one of the goals of this whole enterprise of the credential engine is to also encourage the movement of people who have their competencies in PDFs to move them up into machine actionable form that we see at the top of the figure. That was all, Gene. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was, does anybody have any questions or comments about this? You know, the competency frameworks are such an important part of describing credentials. And when we're talking about competency frameworks, we're, you know, talking about learning outcomes and learning standards as well. We use a lot of different, you know, ways of describing these various frameworks. All of them work with this model that we're using. So whether or not it's a you know, K-12 learning standard, or it's a post-secondary learning objective or learning outcome, or a set of competencies, they're all represented here in this same way.
Gene, if I could jump in one more time on the competency frameworks. So the competency framework registry is being put together with the already developed technologies from ADL. There's one other aspect, however, of the ADL that I think also plays into this, and that's that not only will the competency registry be able to handle competencies, but it will also be able to handle related control vocabularies, related concept schemes. So, for example,
Yes.
you might have a control vocabulary of occupations and their definitions. They're not a competency framework, but they are critical to the functioning of the credential registry, the credential registry, and of the competency frameworks, because frequently competency frameworks may reference, for example, an education level. Or so we'll also have the capacity to do machine representations of those controlled vocabularies that competency frameworks and credentials rely on. And I think that's a pretty nifty addition as well. And they would function exactly the same way, where every concept in the concept scheme, if it were an occupations concept scheme, where every occupation has its URI and is also referenceable in the same way. That's it.
Right. Yeah, and as we dig more into the details of this, we can also kind of show, demonstrate those kinds of examples that will be helpful to everyone. So, Jeff, thanks for your comments over there. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Does this make sense? Let us know what you think about it, or if you have any comments. While you're possibly putting some more comments or thumbs up or whatever suggestions in the chat, I want to move on to the next segment of mapping to the CTDL. And this is where each of you have left off with your Google Sheets in the shared folder. And what we want to talk about today is just specifically with structured and unstructured data, a couple of examples, and then in the next webinar we can move into some additional, but we want to highlight the mapping API that Nate will show a little demo of, and we want to talk about when it's appropriate to, for example, use the CTDL editor for very small numbers of credentials to push linked data out to the registry and back to your website. So I'm going to give it back to Nate again to cover the next three slides, I think 4 slides, Nate, and go ahead and screen share the API demo.
Okay. So what we have here kind of is a big picture overview of the different ways that you can publish data into the credential registry. So I know there's quite a bit going on here, but we'll break it down into the pieces that we care about. So if you look across it horizontally, you got some different colored columns here. So the very first one says editor publish. That's what we're going to go into here shortly. This is where you're manually typing data into an interface, and that interface handles, saving the data and formatting and publishing and all of that. It's good if you don't have a lot of data that you have to enter, or if you need to make updates or corrections, that kind of thing. It's a manual process, but it'll handle all the other stuff for you. The next one over is the formatting API endpoint. So this is one of the things, the formatting and the third-party publish are both kind of related in that we're developing the shared thing that's a couple layers down there, where it says API helper class. So both of these will work more or less the same way. The first step, which is the key that we're going to focus on today, is going to be mapping your data to that class, to CTDL, to that kind of thing. So the mapping is the really important part. But once you've done that, what the formatting one will let you do is use our API to essentially format your data from a simplified format that's a little easier to work with into the full-fledged CTDL that will work inside of the registry. And you can just have that data returned to your system, and then you can use that. You can put that on your web page. You can use that to publish on your own. You can use that to even just to check your system, what you're publishing. there's a lot of potential uses for that, but it's related to the third-party publish API, which is the yellow column there, the third one. So what that does is the same process. You map your data to the helper class, you send it off to our system, and then our system will handle the publishing of it into the registry, and it'll send you back the results of that process. So we're going to take a look kind of at some of that here in a bit. But there's some additional ways of getting data into the registry that I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to kind of gloss over for today. So there's the registry proxy publish, which is essentially where your system, you take care of formatting the actual CTDL properties and classes on your own, and then you send those to the registry, which means that basically it's between you and the registry how all that's handled. We're not really a part of that process in terms of like the helper API stuff. Then there's the website crawler publish, which is kind of like it's the gold standard that we want everyone to get to eventually. Now what this is, it's a little different. So your system, either via the helper API or on its own, whichever way, gets data into CTDL. Then you put that on your website, either embedded within the tags or via some blocks of JSON that we can show here in a bit. But anyway, it ends up on your web page, and the reason you'd want to do that is twofold. So the first one is that it can be crawled by the Credential Engine Registry crawler, which will understand the CTDL as it's formatted on your page, pull that into the registry, and take care of the process from there. The advantage of this is that whenever you want to update data about your credential or whatever else, all you have to do essentially is update your website. So as long as that data is being generated along with the page, it will always be up to date, and so the next time the crawler comes to visit, to check up on it, it'll get whatever the latest data is, which means you don't have to mess around with publishing to the registry on your own at all. You just have to update your website. And the other benefit of that is that once the CTDL has been kind of accepted into schema.org and is recognized by Google and Bing and Yahoo and the other major search crawlers, the fact that your data is on your web pages already and it's already in CTDL lets not only the CER crawler do it, but it lets all those other search engines crawl it as well, which will help drive traffic to your site. It'll raise your search rankings and all that good stuff. So that again is what we want everyone to get to. Because that way, like I said, you don't even have to mess around with publishing directly to the registry yourself. Your data is always up to date. It benefits anyone who comes to that page who who has a mechanism for understanding the CTDL properties and whatnot. The fourth, or I guess fifth, and then last, sort of way of publishing to the registry is a self-signed publish. Now, what this is a little different. This is where you manage essentially all of the aspects of the process other than storing the data. So you're going to handle the signing of the documents, which is a lot of very technical processes I don't need to really go into detail on. But essentially, you handle a lot of other things that you don't necessarily need to handle in the other ways of publishing. So that's kind of an additional option. But going back to what we're wanting to focus on today, are going to be the first 3 columns here, the orange, green, yellow, and then, of course, the mapping process. And so the output of all that is going to be linked data on the web, which is on your website, as I said, and in the registry. Okay, so this one here, what we're going to look at is going to be the editor publish. So again, this is the sort of manual process where you've got a form that has names and fields, and you type data into it. So if you've got a small amount of data and you're not necessarily needing to come up with programming an entire API thing, or thing to interact with the API, I should say, or if you don't have a database, if your data is just raw HTML data, or if you've got it in PDFs and whatever, if you have a small amount of data and you can manually enter it, that's the route you'd want to take.
Hey, yeah, Nate, do you have the editor up just to do a real quick? So do we want to go through these slides and then you show the editor and the mapping API, or do you want to show the editor
I can
now?
show that. Give me just a moment to pull that up, and I will go ahead and start the screen share here.
So, and each, can everyone see?
There we go.
There we go. Can everyone see that screen share now? You should see the green and kind of grayish blue panels of the CTDL editor.
Right.
So as Nate was saying, this is the manual process. It's a manual process we've been using, to learn about credentials and to handle the initial credentials selected by all of you. And each person on this webinar should have access to this. And when you log in and you go to edit a credential, you see these kind of panels that are that are essentially the CTDL. So if Nate were to click on any of those panels and open it and then hover over the little info bubbles, you would see the related CTDL definition, if there was a usage note, the property, and so forth. So it's essentially a one-to-one, except for some properties that are kind of behind the scenes, because as you're filling it out, it can automatically generate those properties. So you know, using this approach of manual data entry, of course, is not, you know, I'm not really going to strongly recommend it. But when you have a very small number of credentials, maybe a very static HTML website, this could be the way to go. And what it does is once information is entered, it is published to the registry. There's a register button there at the bottom right-hand corner. And then, you know, you're seeing it in the Work It app as well. So you could see all that data that is there. So it could be entered. What we can do is begin to require a little extra piece of upfront information. You log in, you create an account, and you essentially state how long the information is good for. So when you're approaching that kind of timestamp or expiry or a recommendation or request to update the data, the system could automatically notify contacts responsible for that credentialing information and say, hey, you indicated that this credential information should be refreshed by this date, so we can kind of force at least looking at it and responding, or we can basically embargo or you know, just make it inactive, not purge it, but make it inactive so it won't be available in the registry for apps to use until the data is refreshed. So in addition to pushing it out to the registry, and we were going to try to have this on here today to show you, but just as you see on the Work It app, there's some blue buttons that show that raw metadata. We're going to have a links directly from the view you just saw to the kind of raw metadata manifest, the raw metadata in the registry, and essentially a download with a little pop-up that says copy and paste this into this location into your website, and this information will all be crawlable. So then you have your link data on the web and you have your link data in the registry. And again, this is for very small numbers of credentials that are essentially stable, meaning not a lot of changes. Maybe they only are updated once a year or something like that. Nate or Stuart, do you have anything to add to the CTD?
Yes, I'd like to add one note that about the editor and our current process of doing this mapping. The editor, if you're having some difficulty figuring out, you know, what the properties, how the properties in the spreadsheet apply to you, it would be useful to go find your record in the in Work It and go into Edit so that you can do what Nate was showing. For example, let's just take Nate, the credential name and credential description, the first two in red. If you weren't quite sure what property that would be, the little info box that Nate's been picking on actually would show it. So okay, so the credential name data goes in CE terms name. And maybe do the same thing with description, Nate. So it goes in, they just happen to be this very, very descriptive, but some of them are not so descriptive. And then maybe the organizing, the owning organization. So again, the owning organization points to the value is a credentialing organization. So the use of the editor kind of as a little, as for training wheels on how to get from the data that is on your website. You can look it up in the editor if you're not sure about how to fill out the spreadsheet and actually see which properties the information for your credential applies. So it's a nifty little way to kind of double check on the way you're thinking about the mapping.
Yeah, and of course, then you also see it in the Work It editor to get that even more context as well. So, okay, so that's the CTDL editor. I mean, this is you know, available now. It's being used. It's updated as any CTDL updates are made along, you know, with the registry. And this is accessible to all partners. Everyone on this webinar should have a login. If for some reason you don't, please let us know, let Scarlett know. But everybody should be able to log in to, all partners, I should say, and advisors only can log into the Work It app. And you can see and edit your credentials. And so you won't be able to edit others' credentials, but you can edit yours. And you just click on the edit button and then you see the CTDL editor. Okay, and do you want to go ahead and move that off the screen there, and let's talk about the structured data and mapping data to the CTDL.
All right, so what we're developing right now is a way to make it kind of easier for your system to publish to the registry. So CTDL itself has a whole lot of classes and properties, and it's very particular in how they're put together. So to kind of simplify that process, what we're developing is we just call it a Registry Assistant. It consists of I guess an API class. We see here the API helper class. And what this is sort of a cut down version of CTDL. At this time we're still expanding it as we go along, but at this time it's a simpler version of CTDL that uses property names that aren't necessarily in the schema, that are a little bit more self-descriptive. So instead of, you know, CE terms : name, we just have name, that kind of thing. And what the idea is that you will have your system map its data to that API class, and then you will send that to our system. Our system will take care of taking what's in there, which is, again, it's a cut down, it's an abstraction in fact of CTDL. And what that means is that if CTDL changes, you know, something, that those changes will be either reflected in that class or they will be sort of hidden by that class. And what I mean by that is you won't have to worry so much about keeping track of exactly everything that goes on in CTDL. We'll take care of that for you. But anyway, so you map your data to that API class, you send that to us, our system will transform the data in that to the CTDL that would be used in the registry. And depending on whether you use the formatting API or the publish API, we will either just send that data back to you and you can do whatever you want with it, or we can go ahead and publish that data on your behalf, and of course you can send that to you in that process as well. But we can go ahead and publish that data on your behalf within the registry itself. So they're two very closely related kind of aspects of the API that we're working on. And I do have the page up if you want to, you can move that screen share back over. Okay. So the tricky thing about an API is that because it's all done by machine, you know, machines in code and whatnot, there's really not much of a visual to it. But what I've done here is I've set up this page to kind of give the next best thing to a visual that I can. So what this will do, for the, you know, the sake of time, instead of having me type in a whole bunch of data into a form, I'm just going to pull data from something that we have in the system already. And what it's going to do is populate the simplified class. Now I want you, I don't know if you can see that, let me zoom in here a little bit. You can see that instead of, again, the CTDL properties, we just have simplified, you know, property names and just some really basic kind of data about this credential. So this is what you would be sending to us. And whenever you do that, we will take this data and transform it into this. So you see here we've got the Json-Ld, it's got the, you know, the context block, it's got the IDs, it's got all the more sort of, you know, technical requirements of CTDL. And you can compare it, you know, side by side with the data that you sent. And there's a couple of different reasons for this. The one thing you'd want to do here, is kind of get a grasp of CTDL if you're not familiar with it. If you're interested in exploring it deeper, learning more about it, seeing how the things that you sent to us map to the things you get back. I mean, that's one thing you can do with it. The other thing you can do with it, of course, is put this data here, on your website. So that in the future, whenever the crawlers and things are ready, they can crawl that data. So we've got another button here called Detail Page Raw Metadata. Now what that's doing is back over on the detail page down well, I've got it zoomed in so it's on the bottom now, but in the Raw Metadata section, we have this data here. And so what it's doing now is it's pulling the detail page raw metadata for that same resource. And this is probably more of an internal testing thing because, again, we're still developing this API. But the idea here is that we can compare what the data that we got back from you guys, it gets transformed into this, and we can compare that against what we have in the system. Now, again, this data came from the system, so it should all be a one-to-one match, but it allows, again, for a side-by-side comparison. So this particular part is probably not so relevant to you guys. But then what you can do is, again, you can publish the data. So this would be using the yellow column, I think it was, the publish API endpoint. And right here, because again, this is for internal testing, we can either use the validation or we can skip the validation. Now, the validation, real quick, is whenever you try to send data to the registry, it's going to be checked against a validation process that ensures that it is correctly structured, valid JSON, it's valid Json-Ld, it's valid CTDL in Json-Ld, so there's multiple steps to it. If it is, it'll take it, great. If not, it'll reject it, it'll send you some error messages and things like that. So this record's already published, so I'm not going to click those buttons here, but if I were to, it would give me kind of the output of that process. So again, this is just sort of an attempt to give some kind of a visualization to an API because APIs don't really have visuals generally. So we'll go ahead and move over. Do we have one more slide on this? Or
Nate,
yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Nate, can you slide it back in,
sure.
the frame back in?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing because you said when we were at step 2, you said and then you can submit to, and then you went through steps 3, steps 4. Isn't the fact though that once this mapping is done, there's no need on their end to do the in quotes submitting? It's all part of the app, isn't it? Part of the
well, the idea is that what their system will do is populate the class that looks like this, that has this structure to it. And then they will submit that to us, and then we'll take care of the rest of it from there. So we'll do the transformation and either the publishing, or we'll just send the data back to them. So what I mean by submit is they send that to our API.
Yeah.
They send it to the API.
Yeah.
So once it hits the API, they don't have to be concerned about 3, 4,
right,
5,
yeah,
those other pairs. Oh, you're just sure, okay.
Just kind of showing what happens to it afterwards. Yeah.
Right, but they are not involved once it hits the API. They're not involved in all of these other things.
Right.
Just wanted to draw.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so did we have, I think, one more slide on that?
Well, that was just a demo, so and you've just done that.
Right,
so
yeah.
So
go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think just driving home the point again that we want to have useful, helpful, easy to use options based on what's most appropriate for the registry participant, whether they have multiple systems. So that mapping API could have been, the sources could have been from different, maybe databases, for example. But the point of that one is to make it as easy as possible. You do your mapping, and as Nate was saying, it does the rest, and the output is the linked data on the web and the linked data in the registry. Any questions or comments on the editor or this specific API option? As Nate said, there's multiple options. This one, to me, seems like it should be the most useful because it should be the easiest, to use where it's appropriate. Questions or comments? And audio is on, so feel free to talk as well.
May is entering a text. While May is entering, I would note that at the top of each of those options is the map to, just to bring us back to where we are in where each of the partners are. That Nate, if you could just flip it back again to the.
Right. So if you remember in the columns we showed earlier, there were sort of different options as far as you can either use our API or you can, I think it was the third-party publish or registry publish, whichever one it was like the blue column, I think. Either you map your data to our simplified API class, which is supposed to be, kind of an easier process, and you send that to us and we take care of the rest. Or if you want to, you can develop your system such that you map directly to CTDL. So instead of giving us, this sort of simple data over here, you can come up with the more, I guess, complex data over here. And the two are equivalent in terms of what they're saying. It's just, they're both mapping processes. They're just kind of different mapping processes. And, one will become the other eventually. So again, if you send us this data, it gets transformed into this. So the reason that you might want to go ahead and do the mapping to CTDL directly, again, is if you essentially you want to have a better understanding of it, first of all, but also if you want to express, if you're looking at the credreg.net, the metadata viewer that shows all the different classes and properties in CTDL. I guess I'd go ahead and pull that up, couldn't I? And you want to kind of express things that are in here that are not necessarily implemented in the simplified API yet. And again, it's not done, so we're still adding things to it. But if you see something in all of this that you want to go ahead and express right now, you could construct your system to map directly to CTDL to do that. So either way, it's a mapping process.
Right. Well, my key point was that it all begins with a mapping, no matter which option you choose.
Right.
Which option you choose, there's no way out of this initial mapping of your data, whether that data is provided through a vendor system, or that's what the vendor dialogue was about, or from your from your campus systems. It all begins with the mapping.
Right, and May has a question here in the chat. What will be the linked data for our own website?
I believe we're going to cover that next, actually. Looking at the agenda here.
Yeah, well, why don't you go ahead, because we already showed the editor. The next slide is really just a screenshot of it.
Okay. So the thing that we discussed earlier is what we're going to add to the editor is, a button that's going to be, either up here or maybe down in the credential registry data section that will essentially give you this here. So this is the raw metadata for that credential. And the idea is that we want you to have this available on your web page. So we'll give you kind of a download link for this. And then what you can do with it is you can put it on your web page. So this is just a real simple kind of sample page here. So you see we've got a credential, and you can pretend that this is your credential data on a web page. There's no metadata markup associated with it at this point. So a human could read this, but a machine could not. A search crawler would only be able to understand very basic things about this. So the HTML for that, the crawler's going to read looks like that. Not much to it. So if you look at anything in schema.org, there's going to be examples of different ways that you can mark up your data with metadata that crawlers can understand already, because it's in schema.org. So what we did was kind of base this page on those examples. So if I were to take this simple credential here and add data to it such that a crawler could understand it, it would look more like this. So you've got your original HTML, and all I'm doing is just adding these properties to the tags themselves. So there's two different ways of doing this. So there's the microdata format, which looks like that, and there's RDFA, which is essentially the same data, just encoded a slightly different way. So both of these involve adding just properties to the existing tags that you have. There might be some cases where if you have data that's embedded within another class, you might have to use some meta tags here and there. But essentially, all you're doing is adding tags to the HTML template that you've already got. And in some cases, depending on what your data is, that might be all you need to do. But to tie this back into the other stuff, we have this other example here. So this is the Json-Ld example, and again, we've got the same HTML data that we had without any markup. It's just that it's, in addition to that, we have sort of not exactly a copy of it, but the same data, I guess it is sort of a copy, repeated up here in the Json-Ld. Now the reason you'd want to do this is, depending on how your pages are generated, it might actually be easier to have your system output this block in addition to the regular HTML. Part of that's just going to depend on how your CMS works, how your templates work, how your whole system is set up. But the other thing is that Google, and I believe other search engines, but Google in particular recommends using this format. I imagine just because it's easier to crawl, it's easier to understand. So again, what this data is sort of a simplified representation of what you get over here. So the idea is that within the editor, there will be a link to download something that looks like this, where it's a big block of Json-Ld, and then you can put that on your website inside of a special script tag here. So your web page will look like this for a credential. Then again, once Scheme.org has accepted CTDL and whatnot, Google and Yahoo and whoever, whenever they come along, they'll be able to understand this block of CTDL and know a whole lot more about your credential than they otherwise would, which means they'll be able to drive traffic to that page about that credential. So it's a benefit to you, it's a benefit to anyone who visits that page, and when the Credential Engine Registry crawler is set up, like we went over before, it too will be looking for this. So, I mean, it'll look for the other stuff as well, but primarily it'll be looking for the Json-Ld block here. So again, it all kind of ties together. So if you were to send your data, if you take your data, you map it to the simple API, you send that to us, we transform it into this, you take this, you put this on your website, then the crawlers and everything else can read it. So that's kind of the I don't know, the loop, I guess.
Nate, hey, so when you were giving that example from the editor, that's kind of one by one. I want to emphasize that, though there could be an output from the editor, like let's say you have 3 credentials or 5 credentials and you want to use the editor, but we're going to encourage you to put that data back on your website. We could output all 5 credentials. And just as you were showing with the mapping API, obviously that would be for colleges, universities, and other certifications that have many credentials. Some could have hundreds of credentials. When we push out the, or the API does, not we, that format, that JSON linked data, Json-Ld format, then you could put that, however many credentials are, you put all of that on your website to be crawled. So, we want to think about many other uses of search engines and other kinds of applications that would, certainly find that information valuable. So, far more valuable than typical HTML web page markup.
Nate, I'd like to ask a question. So basically, once the data goes through the API and is serialized as not serialized, sorry, I don't want to use that term, and is in CTDL form, it can be serialized in any one of these. It can be serialized as microdata. It can be serialized as RDFA, or using RDFA, it could even be used for text markup. They could even mark up this. Or in Json-Ld, will they be able to request which flavor, if I can call those flavors, they want? Say my nothing but microdata.
Well, we could probably do something like we could do. Go ahead.
No, that was it. That was it.
Okay.
I was just wondering.
So we could probably do something like a turtle as an output. Yeah, we're getting audio lag. Sorry about that. So the tricky thing about these markups here is that they're totally dependent on what the existing HTML of your page is. So if it was something that was super simple like this, which again is simple just because it's an example, maybe we could do that, but a lot in the real world, a lot of these cases are going to have, a lot more HTML going on than this. So marking up the tags themselves is essentially going to be up to whoever is generating those web page templates. So I don't think we could do that. But what we could do is output it in Json-Ld. We could offer Turtle as an option or other kind of independent standalone serializations. But ultimately, we want to encourage the use of Json-Ld just again because that's what Google wants you to do. That's what the other search engines are going to be looking for, and because all you have to do is essentially just copy and paste what we give you back from the API onto your page. So there's no additional transformation required. You take the data that's in here and turn it into these tag markup things. So this is kind of what we're pushing for, basically.
I understand. But somebody might want to bring it back and actually put it into an RDF triple store or something. And I think the point here is that the data, the CTDL data, is capable of being serialized or encoded in any number of serializations. Some may be more preferred than others, but the real point is that there are choices, and sometimes you run into shops that have a preferred. They've been for a long time. There were huge discussions of whether RDFA or microdata was the way to go. There are wars. People would die rather than get off their microdata. So all I want to say is that any of it is possible. Any of it is possible, depending on how you want to use it locally. You're absolutely correct that today Json-Ld is kind of the preferred for the search engines, and that's probably the major use. But I think it's important to understand that that the serialization is kind of irrelevant, that we can generate any of it. And so my question was whether, sort of like content negotiation, a university couldn't say, we want all of our stuff back in Json-Ld, or we want it all back in RDF XML, or we want it all back as key-value pairs because we plan to do something else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something to think about.
Right, and certainly there's existing, kind of methods for taking something that's in Json-Ld and transforming that into those other formats if that's something that you want to do as well.
It happens every day. There are converters that just change it. You would take the native CTDL and run it through a converter. You make your choice, and what we might consider is when the API, like the first one, the API that actually returns, literally returns the data, that there might be a means in that API to set the flavor of return you want. To set the flavor.
Right. You might want it in more than one format for multiple reasons, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think all that is very plausible and can be done, and in particular if it helps organizations utilize it better and is more valuable to them, we would certainly want to do it. So if anybody else has any ideas or thoughts about that, let us know. There's a slide that's a picture of the editor, and we already looked at that, so we don't need to cover it again. And so what we want to do is next time we meet, we want to get into some of these other options of open source tools that may be used for unstructured sites that maybe have our smaller sites, as well as you saw some of those examples of marking up web pages that Nate was showing you. So all this information is, some of it's already on the CredReg site, and some of it we're getting ready to do an update that we'd like to have out by our monthly TAC meeting on the 30th. So we'll make sure that we send you, direct links as well. But I want to get into next steps. So we can move forward with that goal of working with each of you to get your credentials as linked data on the web and in the registry. And looking at the first step of that kind of mapping process and where teams are with their Google Sheets, some further than others, we want to know how can we best work with each partner to complete that mapping. What would help at this point? How can we assist? How can we best help you with that mapping, and then selecting the most appropriate approach to putting that data out and getting it on the web and in the registry. I see Jeff is typing. We'd love to hear from everyone that has audio. So, would it help if, if you, assembled your kind of team, and, a representative from the credential engine team came out to your, to your place and sat down with everyone? What is the best way to help move forward with each partner?
Hey, Jeannie, this is Jeff. One idea that came up in our group was to ask the major vendors to provide a default mapping of their terms into CTDL terms, because I think many institutions might just use the standard person table, for example, for their SIS, and every institution that uses that table would have the same mapping of, first name is, or, well, maybe person was a poor choice, but there could be some common mapping that could just be helpful to move institutions further down the road, and then they're just adjusting to their customized portions of their credentials. Like, usually competencies are sort of done in a whole variety of messy ways, so that could be more valuable.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Love to hear from you. Okay. Well, I think at this point we're going to be, reaching out to each of the teams kind of individually, so we can, move forward with, as Jeff suggested, that kind of vendor mapping. But that's not the solution for all of the partners. Not all the partners are using these vendors. They're not all post-secondary and so forth. So, we need to know how we can best assist you in moving forward. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions, suggestions? If not, we're done a little bit ahead of schedule, and I'll go ahead and close out the webinar. Okay, well, I'm not hearing any other voices or seeing the chat going. So thanks everyone so much. We appreciate everyone taking the time today, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Have a great day.